Why the United States will lose to China. What do I mean by that? I'm going to give you the reasons why the United States will eventually lose economically, scientifically, innovatively to China. And it has to do with human capital, which I consider to be the most important capital. Human capital is more important than regular capital, more important than natural resource capital. I'm going to give you the reasons why the United States will lose the most important race, the race of human capital, which will lead to the United States losing the economic race, the scientific race, the innovation race. As we have seen throughout history, when the collapsing empire is being challenged by the new and upcoming empire, there's generally conflict, and we see that today. The United States continuously demonizes China for being an unfair competitor. Of course, when you look at history, you'll see that it's really the United States that has been the unfair competitor for many decades. But I'm getting a little off the topic. I think this conflict is going to increase because the old power never wants to give up its supremacy. Let's not forget that China was invaded by European powers and the US on a few occasions. The Chinese would call this time period the century of humiliation. One of those wars, which was named the Boxer Rebellion, led to the West forcing China. Of course, China had lost the war, and the West had won the right to be able to import opium. So opium was legalized in China. The West imported opium, making large profits and creating tens of millions of Chinese drug addicts. Needless to say, the Chinese are very distrustful of the West in general and of the United States in particular. But I digress. Why do I say that the United States will eventually lose this competition to China? When we look at what determines whether somebody becomes a criminal, a murderer, a robber, a detriment to society, as opposed to a law-abiding citizen, somebody who innovates, somebody who's productive to society. What determines that? Well, if we look at some statistics, what do we see? You know, I watched a documentary from the 1950s that showed the vast majority of children were born to two-parent households. Back in the 1950s, unmarried women having children was unheard of, which is something that's occurring in China today. But when we look at the detrimental effects that single motherhood has to society, and I'm going to put these figures on screen so you could look at them. 63% of youth suicides are from fatherless homes. 90% of all homeless and runaway children are from fatherless homes. 85% of all children who show behavior disorders come from fatherless homes, which is 20 times the average. The 90% of homeless and runaway children is 32 times the average. The 63% of youth suicides is 5 times the average. 80% of rapists come from fatherless homes, 14 times the average. 71% of all high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, 9 times the average. Fatherless children are twice as likely to drop out of school. 75% of all adolescent patients in chemical abuse centers come from fatherless homes. Even after controlling for income, youths in a father-absent household still have had significant higher odds of incarceration than those of two-parent households. The horror story goes on and on. Daughters of single parents without a father involved are 53% more likely to marry as teenagers, 711% more likely to have children as teenagers, 164% more likely to have premarital birth, 92% more likely to be divorced. 43% of children in the United States live without their father. 43%, almost 1 in 2. Let me give you a brief history. In 1965, 24% of black infants and 3.1% of white infants were born to single mothers. By 1990, the rates had risen to 64% for black infants and 18% for whites. If we take a look at this graph that I'm going to post, you'll see that by 2014, the number of black children born to single-parent households had surpassed 70%. The number of white children had surpassed or reached 30%. The total was 40%. 40% of all children by 2014. In 2015, 77.3% of black births were illegitimate, meaning born to single mothers, and it was 30% for whites, with the average being 42%. That's in 2015. Of course, now let's take a look at China. China actually has created laws. I know that people in the United States would be appalled at these laws, but I think in the long run they're going to help society. And that's one of the reasons I feel, and I was told by my social studies teacher when I was growing up in elementary school, he said, a benevolent dictatorship is always better than a democracy. And he was right. From my experience, democracies always get worse. Never get better, always get worse. So let's take a look at some of the laws that China's instituted. If a woman gets pregnant and she's not married, she has to pay a social maintenance penalty. That social maintenance penalty varies from province to province. It could range from as low as half a year's salary to 6 times a yearly salary. Plus, a single mother in China has to pay all the hospital costs. The state doesn't pay any of it. Children born to extramarital affairs, the people involved in those affairs have to pay a penalty of $35,000. Of course, abortion is widely available in China and is widely accepted. You know, people do have sex outside of marriage in China, but since abortion is widely available and accepted, then we have less than 1% of children being born out of wedlock. Another law that China has is the denial of household registration for the child. This allows the child to be registered in school and access to social services such as medical care. So China's government puts such large penalties on a single mother getting pregnant that if a single mother does get pregnant, or a single person does get pregnant, they almost always have an abortion. But let's talk about some other social values in China. There was a study done in Princeton. I wanted to print or to show this on the video and read a few sentences from it because I found it very interesting. Social values and attitudes towards divorce play a part in the outcomes of children of divorced parents. Chinese parents generally have high expectations for their children and feel a strong sense of responsibility towards child rearing and tend to put their children's interest at the forefront of their marriage. They are less likely to divorce if they have a child, especially a son, or if the child is young. Chinese parents also tend to tolerate unhappy marriages for the well-being of their children. 85.6% of parent respondents agreed that divorce is always harmful to children. The decision to divorce or to delay divorce may partly depend on how a parent evaluates the resilience of his or her child. If the parent senses that divorce will be very detrimental to the child's future, or that the child is not ready to endure a divorce, the idea of divorce may be abandoned or delayed until the child is grown. Interestingly enough, divorce is on the rise in China, but it's on the rise in the rich provinces and amongst families where the wives have higher educational attainment, whereas divorce is more prevalent in lower socioeconomic groups in the United States. Very interesting. Well, if they get married at all in the lower socioeconomic groups in the United States, because in the lower socioeconomic groups you'll have maybe women having children with 2 or 3 or 4 different guys. This social experiment is playing out before our very eyes. And I have a feeling it won't turn out too good for the United States. As the human capital increases in China, the human capital in the United States keeps deteriorating. It's going to be very interesting to watch the future. Hopefully, you're at a safe enough distance away when the bullets start flying. Having left the United States, and renouncing my citizenship, I feel I have the experience to help other Americans do the same. Renouncing my citizenship would turn out to be one of the best economic decisions I would ever make. Not to mention the benefits to my physical and psychological well-being. Today, I consider myself a free man. If you need help leaving the United States, renouncing your citizenship, acquiring a new citizenship, or just someone to talk to help you on this difficult journey, then contact me by email and we can set up consultations. You can also donate to my PayPal account. The information is in the low bar.